History is a story told by victors, but it is edited by the survivors. And sometimes, the most important victor is the one who is deliberately erased. We remember Alfred the Great, the king who hid in the marshes and returned to save his kingdom. We remember his son, Edward the Elder, and his grandson, Aethelflaed, the first true king of England. But the bridge between them, the architect of their victory, the engineer of England itself, was not a king. It was a princess, given away as a political pawn, a woman who was never meant to rule. A leader forged in the wreckage of a burning world, who rose to command armies of hardened warriors and became the one person, the only person, the Great Heathen Army truly feared. This is not the story of a damsel in distress. This is the story of a master strategist, a military engineer, a psychological warrior. This is the lost epic of Aethelflaed, the lady of the Mercians, the woman who built England and then was systematically deleted from its memory. To understand Aethelflaed, you must first understand the apocalypse she was born into. The year is 871. The island of Britain is not England. It is a fractured collection of warring kingdoms: Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia, Wessex. And they are all burning. For decades, the Vikings had come to raid. They took gold, they took slaves, and they left. But this was different. This was the Mycel heathen here, the Great Heathen Army, an invasion force numbering in the thousands, led by the legendary sons of Ragnar Lothbrok. This was not a raid. This was a conquest. Northumbria fell. Its kings were butchered. East Anglia fell. Its king, Edmund, was tied to a tree and shot full of arrows. Mercia, the proudest kingdom, fractured. Its king was driven into exile. Only one kingdom remained, the last light in a darkening world, Wessex. And it was here, in the heart of the storm, in the year 870, that Aethelflaed was born. She was the firstborn child of Alfred, a prince who at the time of her birth was not yet the Great. Imagine her childhood. It was not one of peace. It was a childhood defined by fear, by displacement, by the constant, visceral threat of annihilation. Her education was her father's first act of defiance. Alfred believed the Vikings were a punishment from God, not just for sin, but for ignorance. While other kings trained their sons to fight, Alfred taught his children, all of them, daughters included, to think. Aethelflaed did not just learn embroidery. She learned Latin. She read the histories of Herodotus. She studied the military tactics of Vegetius, the great Roman strategist. She learned geometry, logistics, and engineering. She learned how the Romans built their forts, how they supplied their armies. Her brothers were learning how to wield the sword. Aethelflaed was learning how to supply the man holding it. And then the world ended again. In 878, when Aethelflaed was just 8 years old, the Viking leader Guthrum launched a surprise winter attack. Wessex broke. The army shattered. Alfred himself became a fugitive, famously hiding in the marshes of Somerset. Aethelflaed and her mother were rushed into hiding. For months they lived as hunted animals. This is the moment that defines her. This is the crucible. Think of the psychology of that 8-year-old girl. She doesn't just fear chaos, she understands it. She has seen with her own eyes how a kingdom, a structure that seems so permanent, can evaporate overnight. She learns the most important lesson of her life. Swords are useless without walls. Walls are useless without supplies. Alfred, as we know, emerges from the marshes. He rallies the Fyrd, the local militias. He wins an impossible victory at Edington. He forces Guthrum to a treaty. It is a desperate compromise. Alfred saves Wessex, but he concedes half the country. The Danelaw. The Vikings are no longer an army, they are a state. Alfred secures his border. He begins his famous project of building burhs, fortified towns. And to secure this fragile peace, he needs one more thing: an alliance. He looks north to the shattered remnants of Mercia. The western half is still free, ruled by an old ealdorman named Aethelred. But Mercia is weak. It's the buffer state between Wessex and the Danelaw. If Mercia falls, Wessex is next. Alfred needs to control Mercia, and he has a daughter. She is now 15 years old, and she is a pawn. Around 886 AD, Aethelflaed is married off to Aethelred, lord of the Mercians. This was not a romance. It was a political transaction, a sacrifice. She was a Wessex princess, and the Mercian nobility hated Wessex. She was being sent into a foreign, suspicious, and broken court. Her new husband, Aethelred, was significantly older. He was a warrior, but not a strategist. And most importantly, he was chronically ill. Aethelflaed arrives in her new home, a teenage girl in a hostile land, married to a dying man, and surrounded by Viking enemies. This is the moment where she should have disappeared. She should have become a footnote, a Queen Aethelflaed mentioned only in a marriage charter, destined to retire to a nunnery. But Aethelflaed had read Vigetius. She had survived the marshes, and she had no intention of disappearing. For the first few years, she observed. She was the Lady of the Mercians, a humble, non-threatening title. But her husband's illness was her opportunity. As Aethelred's health faded, a power vacuum opened. Aethelflaed stepped into that vacuum, not with a proclamation. She did it with a ledger and a map. She took control of the kingdom's finances. She audited the estates. She managed the food supplies. She began overseeing the only thing that could save them, the burhs. Her father's strategy in Wessex was to build a defensive shield. Aethelflaed looked at this strategy and saw something more. She saw an offensive weapon. She began to build her own burhs in Mercia, but she didn't just build them to protect her people. She built them as launch pads, as strategic anchors in enemy territory. She built at Bremisburg on the River Severn, cutting off a Viking raiding route. She built at Stafford, securing the road to the Danelaw. She built at Warwick, dominating the Avon Valley. This was not simple construction. This was military engineering on a Roman scale. Each burh was a planned city, defended by massive earthwork walls, all managed by her. She was doing something no one else was. She wasn't just fighting the Vikings, she was outbuilding them. She was making their traditional way of life, lightning raids, impossible. She was changing the very geography of war. And then came the first test, the trial by fire. The year is 907. A massive Viking army attacks the ancient, crumbling Roman fortress of Chester. Chester was a ruin. The garrison was small. Aethelred, her husband, was absent or incapacitated. The city was lost. But Aethelflaed was there. The Irish annals record what happened next, and they record it with a sense of awe. As the Vikings breached the walls, Aethelflaed, commanding the defense, didn't retreat. She adapted. She used psychology. She ordered the entire civilian population to join the fight. She armed them with rocks. As the Vikings poured into the narrow streets, a hellish storm of stones rained down. But Aethelflaed did more. According to one chronicle, she ordered the entire supply of beer and ale to be brought to the walls. They boiled it in massive cauldrons, and as the Vikings tried to scale the walls, the defenders poured boiling beer onto them. But the most brutal and brilliant tactic was yet to come. She ordered the city's entire supply of beehives to be collected. As the Vikings massed for their final assault, the defenders hurled the hives over the walls and into the packed ranks. The result was pandemonium. Thousands of enraged, stinging bees, men blinded, screaming, breaking ranks. The attack shattered. The Viking army was defeated by stones, hot beer, and insects. The Battle of Chester was her graduation. She had proven she could lead. She had proven she could be ruthless. She had proven she could think. The Mercian lords stopped whispering. They started listening. In 909, she did something astonishing. She led an army deep into the Danelaw, not to conquer, but to steal. Her target, Bardney Abbey. Her prize, the bones of St. Oswald. This was a masterstroke of medieval public relations. St. Oswald was Mercia's greatest saint. By rescuing his bones from Viking territory, she was making a statement. She was declaring herself the true protector of Mercia's past and the architect of its future. She brought the bones to Gloucester and built a magnificent new minster to house them. She was manufacturing legitimacy. And 2 years later, she would need it. In 911, her husband, Aethelred, finally died. This was the most dangerous moment of her life. By every law and custom of the 10th century, she was now nothing, a widow. Her authority was gone. Mercia should have immediately been absorbed by her brother, King Edward of Wessex. That was always Alfred's plan. Edward waited in Wessex for the news of Mercia's surrender. But something happened, something unprecedented in Anglo-Saxon history. The Witan of Mercia, the council of hardened, cynical ealdormen and bishops, met. They had seen her rule for a decade in all but name. They had seen her manage the treasury. They had seen her build the burhs. They had seen her command at Chester. They had seen her restore their patron saint. They knew her brother Edward would treat them as a conquered province. They knew she was a Mercian. The Mercian Witan made their choice. They ignored King Edward. They ignored 1,000 years of tradition, and they proclaimed Aethelflaed as their sole ruler. She was not queen. The title was too shocking. They gave her a new title, one that meant just as much. Merchna Hlafdigi, the Lady of the Mercians. A woman in the darkest of the Dark Ages had just been given sole command of a kingdom and its army. Aethelflaed's transformation from pawn to player is complete. She is now one of the most powerful people in Britain, and she has done it against all odds. If you believe these lost stories of history's most formidable women deserve to be told, help us fight the algorithm that tries to forget them. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we continue to uncover the legacies that were deliberately buried. The 910s. This is the decade that will decide the fate of England, and it will be decided by two people, a brother and a sister. King Edward of Wessex and Aethelflaed. They were not rivals, not yet. They were partners. They had grown up together, survived the terror of 878 together. They shared their father's vision, a single, unified Christian England. And they now launched the most brilliant, coordinated military campaign in British history, a war of strangulation. The strategy was a pincer movement executed over 8 years. Edward would build a line of burhs from the south, pushing north. Aethelflaed would build a line of burhs from the west, pushing east. It was a slow, suffocating, relentless boa constrictor of earth and timber. Every spring, the armies would march. They wouldn't just raid, they would build. In 912, Aethelflaed builds at Tamworth. In 913, at Stafford. In 914, at Warwick. In 915, at Runcorn. Each burh was a fortress, a barracks, and a threat. It choked their trade routes. It blocked their raiding paths. It slowly, inexorably starved them. The Vikings panicked. They were warriors of chaos. They didn't know how to fight an enemy who moved with surveyors. In 917, the pincer was in place. The time for building was over. The time for conquest had begun. Aethelflaed unleashed her army. Her target, Derby. Derby was not just a town. It was one of the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw, a Viking capital, a symbol of their power. The Anglo-Saxon army assaulted the walls. The battle was horrific. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that, quote, 4 of her most beloved thanes were slain. These were not just soldiers. These were her personal bodyguard, men who had served her for years. She paid for Derby in blood, but she took it. The fall of Derby was an earthquake. It sent a shockwave across the Danelaw. This wasn't a Wessex king attacking them. This was the lady. This was the woman who had humiliated them at Chester. And she was not finished. Her next target was Leicester, another of the 5 boroughs. Her army marched. The banners of Mercia appeared on the horizon, and the Viking army of Leicester surrendered without a fight. This is the critical moment. This is the psychological victory.
Her reputation had become her greatest weapon. She had cultivated an aura of such terrifying, inevitable competence that the Vikings would rather surrender their capital city than face her army in the field. She was no longer a strategist. She was a terror. While this was happening, her brother Edward was winning his own victories in the south. The pincer was closing. But Aethelflaed was moving faster. She was more feared, and she was about to do the unthinkable.
Summer 918. The entire Danelaw south of the River Humber was collapsing. Only one great stronghold remained: York. Jorvik. York was the Viking capital of England, the seat of Viking kings, and York was terrified of her. The Norse Gaels who ruled York were fighting a civil war. They saw Edward's relentless advance from the south, and they saw Aethelflaed's lightning in the Midlands. They needed a protector. And in one of the most stunning twists in medieval history, the Vikings of York chose her. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle states it plainly. The people of York had promised her that they would yield to her. They were going to bypass King Edward and swear fealty directly to Aethelflaed. Let us pause and understand this. A 48-year-old Anglo-Saxon woman with no official title but lady had so completely outmaneuvered and outfought her enemies that the most powerful Viking kingdom in Britain was about to voluntarily submit to her rule. She was no longer a Mercian leader. In that moment, she was, in all but name, the Queen of England. She had stood on the brink of unifying the entire country, a feat her father had dreamed of, a feat her brother had not yet achieved. She had won. And then she died. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't an assassin's knife. It was a sickness. In her own capital of Tamworth on June 12, 918, just weeks, perhaps days before receiving the formal surrender of York, Aethelflaed, the Lady of the Mercians, died. The timing was so sudden, so tragically, brutally ironic, it feels like a fiction. She had done all the work. She had laid the final piece of the puzzle, and was denied the chance to see the picture completed. The kingdom held its breath. Aethelflaed had a daughter, Elfwin, and in a final defiant act of Mercian independence, the Mercian Witan proclaimed Elfwin as the new Lady of the Mercians. Aethelflaed's line would continue. A kingdom ruled by a woman would pass to another woman. It was a revolution. It lasted 6 months. Her brother, Edward, did not mourn. He acted. He could not allow an independent Mercia. He could not allow this female dynasty to take root. His father's dream was a single England ruled by Wessex. He marched his army into Mercia. He met no resistance. The Mercian lords, with their great protector gone, folded. He deprived his niece Elfwin of all authority and led her away into Wessex. Just like that, it was over. Elfwin vanishes from history. We never hear of her again. She was likely forced into a nunnery, silenced, erased. Aethelflaed's kingdom was gone. Her revolution was over. Her brother Edward took control of Mercia. He took her burghs, he took her armies, and he took her legacy.
When the Vikings of York finally did surrender, they surrendered to him. When the history of the war was written, it was written by his scribes.
This is the final, most insidious part of the story, the erasure. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the main source for this period, exists in several versions. The versions written in Wessex, the official royal history, minimize her. They credit Edward with victories she won. They gloss over her independent campaigns. It is only in a single surviving copy, known as the Mercian Register, that the truth is preserved. A copy likely written by a Mercian monk that details her campaigns, her victories, her burrs, year by year, one by one. Without this one fragile manuscript, she would be gone. She wasn't forgotten because she was insignificant. She was forgotten because she was too significant. She was a woman who ruled, a woman who fought, a woman who won, a woman who, for a brief, shining moment, was more feared, more respected, and more powerful than any king on the island. To the patriarchal world of medieval historians, this was an anomaly, a deviation, a fact so uncomfortable it had to be buried. But you cannot erase geography. Aethelflaed built England, literally. The burghs she built, Warwick, Tamworth, Stafford, are not just ruins, they are the foundations of modern English towns. The frontier she established became the county lines. Her father, Alfred, had the dream of England. Her brother Edward got the credit for England. Her nephew, Aethelstan, who was raised in her court, who learned politics at her side, got the crown of England. But Aethelflaed laid the foundations. She was the architect, the engineer, the strategist who moved the pieces and made the entire project possible. History is full of invisible women. But Aethelflaed was not invisible. She was intentionally hidden. A queen in all but name, whose legacy was so profound that the men who came after her simply pretended she never existed. The story of Aethelflaed is a testament to strategic genius and unbreakable will. But she is only one of many powerful women whose stories have been silenced. Who is another forgotten female leader you believe deserves this kind of deep-dive documentary? Let us know in the comments below. Your suggestions fuel our next investigation. And as always, thank you for watching.